The readings for tonight that I've been sitting with, I've been sitting them with it for a few weeks, trying to find some theme or thread. And then this week I got a phone call from one of my daughters that her dad, my first husband, had died. He and I were not close. We'd gone our separate ways 24 years ago and only seen each other at occasional combined family events, birthdays, weddings and such. And his wife and I have only spoken in general to each other at these events, never a personal conversation. On Friday, I decided to go and see her and take some soup. I had no idea how she would receive me, whether she would feel I was intruding upon her grief, whether she would think the soup was a weird thing to bring. But she welcomed me with a hug and invited me for a cuppa. She was waiting to speak to a funeral director about starting to make the arrangements. I had thought on my way there about offering to be the celebrant at the funeral, if that helped, because I knew they didn't have church connections. And as we were getting on well, I plucked up the courage to make the offer. She was warm to the idea, but I didn't want her to commit herself, and I told her to have a think about it. The next morning, she rang me and said that she'd prefer to have someone who doesn't know the background to be the celebrant. She was apologetic, I was relieved, but it was an awkward moment. And I don't know how that awkwardness will play out in the future. Awkward conversations, awkward relationships, awkward dynamics. I think that's what we're looking at here in the readings for tonight. Firstly, there's Hannah, the first and much loved wife of Elkanah, but she is barren. The second wife, Peninnah has children, and she likes to let Hannah know that she's the better woman. And the word in the new Revised Standard Version is provokes. She provokes her and irritates her and does not make for a happy household. That's awkward. When they go to the tabernacle to worship and sacrifice, Hannah takes herself off to present herself before the Lord. As a woman, she's not allowed inside the tabernacle, so she stands outside. Eli, the priest, is there sitting at the doorway, and he sees her. She's distressed, weeping bitterly, making her prayer. Normally, people would pray and the words would be heard, but she is praying silently, only her lips moving. Eli thinks she's drunk and challenges her. That's awkward. But Hannah stands her ground. She doesn't tell Eli what she was praying for, just that she was praying. I can imagine him being embarrassed, and he gives her his blessing. Well, fast forward 2, 3 or 4 years, don't know how long. I wonder what Eli thought when Hannah and Elkanah showed up and present Samuel to him. It seems strange to us to leave a child like this. That's our awkwardness, not theirs. The song that's attributed to Hannah that we heard tonight and joined in with was recognised by scholars as a later insertion into the text. It's a song of national thanksgiving, victory over enemies, the reversal of fortunes for the downtrodden and oppressed, children for the one who is barren, God's care for the poor. From her awkward position in the family dynamics before the tabernacle with Eli, Hannah brought her concerns to God, and she acted faithfully in keeping the promises that she'd made. From her faithfulness and gifting of Samuel, we have the beginnings of the story of the monarchy in Israel. Samuel was the last in line of the judges and the prophets who guided the people. He's the one who anoints Saul as the first king. Saul proves himself unfit for the job, and so Samuel announces his rejection by God and then anoints David in his place. Well, that's awkward too. But thus begins Israel's short-lived glory days. When we look at the story in Mark, Jesus leaving the temple and his disciples are praising the size of the stones. Jesus, however, is not impressed and predicts that not one stone will be left upon another. I just imagine the disciples feeling confused, unsettled, and awkward. What on earth is he talking about? It doesn't make sense. But later, sitting opposite the temple on the Mount of Olives, Peter, James, John, and Andrew come to him and want the details about when this will happen. What will be the signs? The answer Jesus gives is not clear on details, but his message is basically, don't be distracted from the work of following God's movement by the distressing events that you experience or hear about. Well, we know that there have actually been countless numbers of people over the millennia who have gone the other way. They hear of events happening, the wars, famines, earthquakes, and predict the end days are here, the doomsday. That is awkward, especially when life goes on and the wars, the famines, and the earthquakes continue around the world. After the past couple of years, we might want to add a few more distressing events to the list of the birth pangs, as Jesus calls them in the NRSV. We could add pandemic, storms, floods, hurricanes, climate change, rising seawaters. There's a lot to distract us from the work of God in our world, and it's easy to get caught up in the drama of the present moment. Turning to Hebrews, this is written after this destruction of the temple, as Jesus had predicted, but it's full of the images of the temple, rituals of priests and sacrifices. The writer speaks how Christ has made a single sacrifice that has sanctified us, made us holy, set us apart for God's purposes. Samuel was set apart by God to be part of God's purposes, by his mother to be part of God's purposes. And God, through Christ, has set us apart, called us to be with God and for God, bringing about the kingdom of heaven on earth. We're not separated from God by the curtain, which held God, or not held God, but that protected people from entering into the inner sanctuary in the temple where God was thought to dwell. Jesus opened the way through the curtain, and now all equally are able to approach God. We're not restricted like Hannah from bringing ourselves fully to God. The stones of the temple walls do not make the dwelling place of God. God has written a new covenant and placed within us, on our hearts and minds, the laws of this covenant. You might be wondering where the awkward part is in Hebrews if I am maintaining a theme. Well, how about this? You'll remember that I said Hannah was provoked by Peninnah. I'm tripping over that name, Peninnah, as the word was provoked is in the New Revised Standard Version. Provoked to distress and anguish are the words. And in Hebrews, we're offered an indication both of the privileges and the duties that we have as Christians. In my NRSV Bible, we're firstly told, let us approach with a true heart in full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed pure with water. So there is nothing to separate us from God's love. So come and be assured that all are welcome. Secondly, the writer says, let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who has promised is faithful. Like Hannah's song of victory, we can be assured that God is present with us and that God's will is for those who are suffering, oppressed, downtrodden, that they will be freed from oppression and able to live in peace and with joy. And lastly, the writer says, and let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Just an aside here, the writer had no ideas about the possibilities of how people could continue to meet together thanks to technology. So well done to SYCBaps in extending the possibilities of this. So the day approaching could be another reference to the end times, but that isn't what catches my attention here. It's the word provoke. provoke one another to love and good deeds. Nathan's version, I think from memory, said stirring. Provoke in my dictionary doesn't have positive overtones. It says to stimulate or to give rise to a reaction or emotion, typically a strong or unwelcome one in someone, or to stimulate or incite someone to do something, especially by arousing anger in them, or to deliberately make someone annoyed or angry. When I think of being provoked, the image is of someone with a stick who keeps poking me to annoy me. Provoke one another to love and good deeds. What are we being told to do here? Is it a matter of being so annoying to each other about good deeds that we feel we have to get up and go and do something good too? I've lived in church cultures that felt like that at times, a competition of people trying to outdo each other in saintliness and holiness. Now, that is awkward. I'm actually rescued by the footnote in my NRSV that puts it like this. Let us consider how we can help others in love. I'm relieved. No awkward poking of others to get them to do good deeds, but instead an invitation to look at myself and my action and see what I can do that is loving and supportive of others. Together we are the body, and together we build the kingdom, one stone at a time. So I want to invite you to consider the awkwardness of being God's people. Our actions of love and care for others stand against the me-first culture of our world at this time. There is much to do, many places, people and programs that call for us to make a response that is just, loving, and builds a better world. Let us be awkward followers of Jesus. Like Hannah, let us approach God with all the concerns of our hearts and minds and trust God when it looks impossible. Like Jesus, let us be bold with our belief that God will bring down the structures that oppress and limit us, facing into the future with our whole hearts. And like the writer to the Hebrews, let us stimulate and affirm the action of God's love in our own lives and in each other. Just as a footnote here, there may be times when it is appropriate to be annoying, to provoke one another to love and good deeds. Ring, write, email our political leaders and try to get them behaving like responsible citizens of our world. Here endeth the lesson. Thank you.